This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this!
My name is Kurt North and welcome to our continuing coverage of Season 7 of The X-Files. We are getting into Episode 7 today, Season 7, Episode 7, which is Orison. And joining me today is Darren Mooney. Darren, how are you doing, mate?
You know, it's strange when you think of the chances that we would both be in the state of mind. I think we are too cool to be careless. But we're both looking for the right thing. So I think listeners don't really have to look any further.
Nice. I'm going to... something completely different.
My alternate opening was I was just going to wonder why they didn't call this episode Too Fast or Too Furiouser.
Well, what I was going to say, which is completely nothing to do with the episode whatsoever, but I'm going to quote a well-known movie, is, Darren, what are we doing out here? It's hotter than hell.
It is, yes, unseasonably hot. If I wanted it to be this hot, I would live somewhere closer to the equator. This is completely unreasonable for Ireland in the middle of whatever month this is being released in. Spoiler, we're recording in July. But yeah, that's it is boiling. I am literally melting. If I sound particularly insane or demented, it's not only because I get swept up in Reverend Orison's religious fever, but also because I may have succumbed to actual heat stroke. So listeners, please beware and keep your ears out on the podcast for that.
Well, over the water in good old northwest of England, it's boiling hot. I've been outside doing the grass mowing the lawn. And it's been boiling hot. And I've had to, I've just got a new fan, which is fairly quiet, to be fair. And I wasn't anticipating putting it on today, but it's on. So if you can hear it, I apologise. But it is showcasing that it's apparently 29 degrees in this room. Oof. So, yeah, it is hotter than hell.
Well, you know what they say on the X-Cast, we always welcome a new fan.
We do welcome a new fan. Absolutely. And anyway, so yes, let's get talking about Season 7, Episode 7, Orison. I thought it was really important when we were talking about who was going to host what with the other showrunners, Carl and Sarah, about where I would like, what episodes people would like to do. And I thought that this one would be particularly good for us two to do because we've got some Millennium discussion to have with this. And we've got obviously quite a few interesting things to discuss. So, but before we get into all that, what do you think to this episode? What's your general thoughts and your rating out of 10?
I am not a huge fan of Orison as an episode. I think it's fascinating. I think it's interesting. Like a lot of the 7th season, it is arguably more interesting to think about and to discuss than it is to watch. I think it has very serious problems, which we will undoubtedly get into. I think it is stuffed full of stuff. It's an episode that doesn't know exactly what it's doing or why it's doing it. You know, not to jump too far ahead into discussions, but like Chip Johannesson, the writer, which is one of the reasons we're talking about, because Johannesson was one of the showrunners on the 3rd season Millennium. His original pitch for this did not involve Donnie Pfaster. It was largely focused, I believe, around Reverend Orison. And then at some stage during development, the writers on the X-Files thought, hey, you know what would be cool if we did a sequel to Irresistible and dropped in the character of Donnie Pfaster into this story? And how about like the entire climax and final act of this episode that you have structured around a completely different thing end up being a sequel to Irresistible, which I do not envy Johannesson for having to write. And I think the episode kind of suffers from that in that it doesn't feel like a real sequel to Irresistible, but it also doesn't feel like a real like episode of itself. It's kind of caught between two stools. And I think it like, and I love, like anybody who has listened to me talk in this podcast will know that I am a huge fan of Rob Bowman as a director. He's one of my favorite X-Files directors. I think there's a very obvious reason why he directed Fight the Future. He's one of the most cinematic directors working on the show. Like, I even love Gender Bender for all its problems, because I think it's a fantastically directed episode of television. I think Bowman is absolutely the wrong choice to direct an episode like this.
Yeah.
I don't think that he meshes well with the material. I don't think he's comfortable with the material, and I completely understand that, but I don't think it plays to his strengths. And I think as a whole, the episode kind of suffers. That sounds like I'm being very negative. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas here. I think that there's a lot going on. I think it's a very revealing and informative episode in ways that we are going to kind of talk about and dig into. But yeah, if rating out of 10, this is probably a 3 or a 4 for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. High praise indeed, then.
I mean, that's 2 stars out of 5. You know, I mean, it's not too bad. Like, that's the gentleman's 4.
Okay. I would be a bit more generous. I think this episode's, as you say, I think there's a lot more that you can look at it rather than actually enjoy it as a whole piece. I think you're absolutely right. The episode itself is called Orison.
Yeah.
And that's what it should be focusing on. And the final act doesn't have Orison in at all.
It's really great because like Mulder literally says, by the way, the whole X-Files wrapped up early this week. We better go home. And the episode's like, yeah, but that's not what we're doing this week, I'm afraid, Mulder.
Yeah. So it is really off kilter with that. In some ways, I like it as a Millennium episode more than I do an X-File episode. So I'm sure we'll get into that as well. Not to bang on about Millennium, obviously, but I did think it was important for us to talk about this.
It is very millenniumistic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would be a bit more generous, but I still wouldn't necessarily give it a high score in the world of me. I think I gave Rush 6 out of 10, which is really low for me, unless you're talking about the 1013 show where I gave something 2 out of 10, which I keep going on about. But I would give this a 6.5, pushing maybe a 7, but it's under a 7 for me.
Okay. I'm now resisting the urge to turn this into the Rush cast, where I try to convince you that Rush is actually a secret masterpiece of television that predates the whole superhero boom by several years and deserves to be recognized as far ahead of its time. It's Mulder and Scully visiting a CW superhero show before the CW superhero show is a genre that exists. Anyway,
absolutely.
So
I was lucky to be on that conversation, which you weren't on. So.
Yeah, I know. That'll put me in my place.
I don't think I mentioned the air date. It was 9th of January 2000. So, usual thing, I haven't done this with you for a while. I think it was on Millennium a couple of episodes ago, actually, but we recorded that a long time ago. IMDb score, Darren, have you seen? Would you like to hazard a guess?
Okay. See, I keep thinking to myself, I should probably check this and like cheat beforehand, but I keep forgetting until you spring it on me. That's why the eagle-eared listener may have heard me go, oh shit, under my breath when you started speaking. It's like, I completely forgot about this. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, can you give me any like primers, any warmers? So like, what's the high, what's the low of the season? So what range am I going in? Can you give me that, or am I just taking a swing at it? Okay.
Bearing in mind we've got Fight Club in this season.
Yes, okay. That's what I'm wondering. Like, I need to know what the floor is, and then I need to calculate like accordingly.
Okay, I think when I looked at it this afternoon, I'm going to have a quick look on Google now, but I think it was 6.1.
Is Fight Club, okay.
Fight Club, from what I remember.
And the high is probably like Requiem, and that's at...
No, let's have a look.
It's not Requiem. It's going to turn out to be like Hollywood AD, or it's going to turn out to be like a Wild Swing. It's going to be Sign on Zeet.
We've got 8.4s in here. We have
all right. So
8.5s in here.
Okay. So that's a range. I am going to go with
8.7. 8.7. I'll give you that for.
That's a high. All right. Okay. So what we have in favor of this episode is that it does have a returning character. Donnie Pfaster started like generally regarded as one of the best episodes of the X-Files ever, so he's going to have some weight to him. He's going to bring some fans. I reckon the number of votes may be slightly higher for this than for some of these surrounding standalone episodes. I'm going to take a wild swing. I am going to say 7.4.
Not far off. 7.8.
Wow, okay. All right.
7.8 from 2,508 votes.
Okay.
It places it 9th in the season.
Whoa, okay. All right. Is it above Rush? Answer the tough question. Is it above Rush?
I don't think it's above Rush. Rush got 7.5, so not by much.
It is above Rush. Okay, all right. Yeah. Well, that put me in my place. Perfect.
Yeah. Yes, and ninth in the season, so about halfway, just above half. Would you say that's fair? Would you would obviously put that lower than
I would probably put it a bit lower than that, to be honest. But like, and again, this is the thing with the 7 seasons as a whole, where I think like there are some really, really great episodes in here. I think like Ex-Cops is a genuine classic. I think Requiem is a fantastic season and series and franchise finale simultaneously. And I think there is a lot to like in the season as a whole. I think like Hungry is great as well. But yeah, I would not rank Orison particularly high, but you're right. This is a season that also includes Fight Club. So, you have to balance their swings and roundabouts. But yeah, this is probably going to be in the bottom third, if not bottom quarter of the season for me, I think.
So, yeah, so let's briefly talk about Chub Johannesson then. So he's come over from Millennium. He has a very unique style in Millennium, which I'm not sure that we've talked about over on here. So in the episodes that he's done in Millennium, he's renowned for doing quite bizarre, out there, abstract type episodes. So you can see some of that in this episode, some of the stuff that was originally probably in the first draft. Things I would say like the perception stuff, potentially the music,
tray panning,
the tray panning stuff. So and as I say, as you mentioned before, with the mixing of things, it's kind of like a hybrid. But I also just want to say where it is in the context. So we've got a lot of people would say the beginning of Millennium was around about Irresistible. Irresistible is kind of like its main. There's arguments to say it was before that, but as a general consensus, Irresistible is about where it was.
Yeah.
It's interesting how we come to this episode here, where it's almost like what the second and third season of Millennium is compared to where Irresistible was in the first place. Yeah. So I feel that the comparison between where Millennium was and where Millennium is bookended is really interesting for me. And there's some other comparisons which I'll talk about later on. But what do you think to bring in Chip? I mean, you've said this in the past about people being brought over from different shows or actually being Chris Carter's gone, I'll look after you kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what do you think to actually asking Chip to do an episode in this run at this time?
Yeah, because I think like a lot of the stuff that's really impressive about Carter is that he does tend to take care of the people he works with. I think you see like Harsh Realm writers coming on during the 8th season of the X-Files and kind of writing, which is great. It's one of those things like, I promised you a job, I will keep you busy. I think like Chris Owens is one of those as well, where he like moved down like to Los Angeles or whatever with the show in the 6th season. And they very promptly got written out, but Carter kept finding ways to kind of bring him back to the show, which I thought was great as well. What I find interesting about the way in which this worked out, I think you're first of all, you're bang on about the idea of it, like the evolution of Millennium being like, through Irresistible into Grotesque, out into like Millennium as a TV show, and then back into Orison is almost like the perfect outline of Millennium. Because like if Irresistible is a first season episode of Millennium, one of those, the famous criticism of Millennium being a version of the X-Files where every monster is a pasty balding white guy, then the Orison is like the third season of Millennium kind of circling back in that it's absolutely gonzo and insane and full of all these high concepts. I think when we talked about the episode Millennium on the X-Files, we remarked on like the oddity in terms of like mapping out the 7th season and like assigning scripts and assigning like tasks and assigning stories to particular writers and particular directors, because Millennium is written by Frank Spotnitz, it's written by Vince Gilligan, it's written by John Shiban, I think. So that like it's written by Spotnitz has obviously done his share of Millennium work. Gilligan like jokes that he managed to avoid being drafted over to work on Millennium. You could argue that like his season 4 scripts for the X-Files, like Paper Hearts and Unruhe, are basically like stealth Millennium scripts, but he had done no work on the show. And then obviously Shaban had never touched Millennium as a concept. So you handed it to 3 writers, one of whom had done like time over on Millennium, but the other 2 really had no kind of experience. And then you have the director, Thomas J. Wright, who had directed, I think, about half of Millennium as a show. And it seems really odd then that you have Orison, where it's like you bring in the showrunner for the 3rd season of Millennium, or one of the showrunners, one of the guys who like guided the plane onto the runway at the end of the show, somebody who understood the show and where it was at the end, arguably better than anybody else. And you task him You don't ask him to write the Millennium crossover episode that's being directed by the veteran Millennium director. Yeah. You instead bring him back and have him write the episode of The X-Files directed by a veteran X-Files director who has not directed an episode of Millennium and whose sensibility is not leaning towards Millennium. And you have him write not only Mulder and Scully, but you also have him write a returning character from a season of the show that predates his involvement with 1013. It's a very strange choice, and part of me wonders if like there's not a better version of like both Orison or both like the Donny Faster sequel episode and Millennium. I like, it's really weird to call it Orison because the character in Orison that you're interested in is not Orison himself. But like, I think there's an interesting version of the 7th season where like the John Gilnitz crowd get tasked to write the Donny Faster sequel. And, you know, Johansson goes and he does Millennium with Thomas J. Wright, and he kind of ties it all together. And while he doesn't necessarily have experience writing Mulder and Scully, that script gets passed through a writer's room that has been doing it for 7 years at this point. And so that ends up quite strong. And this ends up being its own thing. And I don't know how it works. I would be very curious how this ended up the way that it did, because like it's an odd episode because one of the interesting things about the X-Files as it gets older and as it goes on is it has this weird engagement with its own history and like its own sense of identity and what it was. So like, I think in the 4th season, you start seeing a lot of callbacks. Like the show's like, oh, we're approaching 100 episodes. We're getting long in the tooth. We're now a veteran TV show. We're an institution. So you start seeing references to the first season. So you see like Max Fennig coming back for a big 2-parter. You see, you know, beloved assistant director returning at the end of the season and then getting killed in the 5th season premiere. You see things like Music of the Cigarette Smoking Man, which replays footage from the pilot. And then you get to the 5th season. The 5th season is like, oh man, we're even more nostalgic. We're going to remember the prehistory. So we're going to tell you like how Mulder opened the X-Files in 3 different ways that are possibly mutually exclusive. We're going to tell you how he got the poster. We're going to jump back in time. We're going to give you prequels to stuff that you haven't seen because we're so invested in history. And then you get to the 7th season. And the 7th season has this really odd thing where it's like misremembering the past. Because like, I think everybody at this point in the show expected that the show was going to be done. It was going to be over and done with and finished. And like, this was going to be the last year. It was time to wrap it up. So you get this weird thing where it's like the show can kind of loosely remember the way that it was in its first season, but it's kind of foggy. And I'm thinking in particular of things like, say, you know, going back to, what's the town? Bellevue, the name for Chris Carter. Bellflower, at the end of the season. And it's very clearly like California as opposed to Vancouver. So it's like the location of the first X-File has changed. Here you have like Donny Faster coming back, but he doesn't feel like the Donny Faster that you remember from Irresistible. He feels like somebody's loose memory of having watched Irresistible at 3 a.m. in the morning several years ago. And it's like, okay, we got to he's got to call somebody a girly girl. He's a death fetishist, and there are some fingers in an ice bag. That's what we got. Let's make it work, guys. Oh, and he turns into a demon. And it's like, yeah, but is he actually a demon or is he just perceived? I don't know. Demon. That's what it is. And so like even here you have like, there's that little moment where Scully talks about like Scout and like how she was called Scout as a child. And you're like, no, that wasn't it. That wasn't what her father, that wasn't the nickname that her father called. It was Starbuck. It's like, it doesn't, like Scout is a different classic of American literature with a, you know, plucky protagonist that you can name. That's a very strange shift to have. And so it all feels very odd. It's like a kind of a foggy misremembering of like what the X-Files was. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I think I'll just touch upon this and then we'll park the Millennium side of it.
Yeah.
Because I'm conscious that people might not have seen a lot of Millennium. Is talking about the evil aspect of Donny Faster. So it's always been a bit of a debate and a really good debate to have within the X-Files community and the X-Cast community about Irresistible, that was he evil or was he just a man who, you know, is just a very evil man. This one, as you say, is very obviously a demon because he turns into physically one and he says he's going to live forever, even though he dies at the end.
He also says you can't kill me, despite the fact that he has been like sitting in prison, presumably of his own free will, if he's a literal demon, for like 5 years at this. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Like he says, you can't kill me. And it's like, but why can't he kill you? What Scully can kill you at the end. Why can't Orison like kill you then and there? Are you bulletproof? If you're bulletproof, then surely that would have come in handy like at any point while you were in prison or like working as a serial killer / death fetishist. It's very odd. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. As I say, and when it comes to it, that if you think about how Millennium would have treated this, is that you would have more of a Mabius type character. Yeah. And, you know, that Donnie would be that kind of person, that he would be able to be a demon. And I just don't think it fits. I mean, I know we've had, you know, Wayne back in last season with Bruce Campbell's character, in terms of endearment, but, you know, it just doesn't really quite fit. And I think that moving on from this into season 8 and some of the stuff that they're like in Empedocles and things like that, which obviously deal with evil and things. So, they are using aspects that they might have done in Millennium in later years. So that's the main thing I wanted to speak about that. Another thing before we dive deeper into the episode as well is what I find a fascination. I don't know if it's something that you've picked up or something that you would like to comment on, but the fascination with time in this season as well, that we've got time slowing down in this episode. You've got Rush and you've got the episode that I've just been discussing about Rush there with the whole being able to be a superhuman. Requiem has the same same effects. Yeah. Closure has slow motion replays in it. All things have slow motion. Now it is around the 1999 Matrix kind of thing. So I can forgive it for maybe it being that, but it is interesting how they're making use of frame rates and technical things and slowing down time, speeding down time, perception of time, things like that they seem to do quite significantly in this season.
Yeah, and I mean, there is also a lot of Moby in this season as well. Like, I think he pops up in it's Sign and Seat. He pops up in obviously all things as well. Mulder turns out to be a big fan of Moby.
But Moby was everywhere. Then,
like ubiquitous. But I feel like we should do a bonus episode just on Moby, because that play album is fascinating, like as a cultural artifact. But no, like that's slowing down. And well, just to bring it back to like the kind of like millenniumness and the serial killer aspect of it. Two things just to talk about there very briefly. First one is you mentioned the idea of evil. And I think like this is fascinating because two things. First thing is that Scully tells a story about like when she discovered that evil existed in the world. The story about the murder that she heard about. And that's basically the moment that she was convinced that evil was something that existed in the world. And that always reminded me of a story that Carter tells. It was Entertainment Weekly in October 1996. Carter tells this story about how the moment he discovered evil, he was literally playing kind of baseball. And he discovered that one of his brother's friends had murdered both an Avon saleswoman and his girlfriend. And he remembers as a child that being the moment that he kind of discovered that evil was something that existed in the world. And it's kind of interesting that you have this whole episode built around Scully listening to the song Don't Look Any Further. And she talks about like hearing that when her mother came in and told her that her Sunday school teacher had been killed. And it's kind of fascinating that you have that there as well, because you mentioned like the 8th season feeling very millenniumistic, in that you could argue like John Doggett is a character who is very similar to the original conception of Frank Black, and obviously all that stuff kind of carrying over as well. And the fact that the 8th season is very much a darker season of the X-Files and is like very brutal and very like bleak and very, you know, not bright in the same way that the 6th and 7th seasons had been. And it feels like it carries over a lot of that millennium aesthetic, but it does feel like, Carter begins to fold in millennium aspects into it, including his preoccupation with the idea of evil in the world. And I do think actually it's interesting that, you know, that the criticism of the first season of Millennium is that it's serial killer after serial killer after serial killer. And that was like a product of the 90s serial killer boom. You know, you're talking about movies like Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Kiss the Girls, all that sort of stuff. Like all that stuff that came out in the 90s window, Single White Female, all of that. And it's kind of interesting that by the time you hit the turn of the millennium, serial killers are kind of old news. So I like that, like Irresistible is, okay, he's a serial killer. That's what he is. The most evil thing in the world. And then we jump forward to like a show that was written in 1999 and aired in 2000. It's like, yeah, serial killers, they're kind of a spent force culturally, haven't really been that big a deal. It's kind of over and done with. So I guess he's a demon. That's what he is now. That's what evil looks like, which is fascinating to kind of get at as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think there is something there in terms of like this being a very millenniumistic episode and kind of laying out like the millenniumistic aspect, because it's also an episode that is about faith. You mentioned like time slowing down being a big recurring motif in the 7th season, and I think that's a very astute observation, along with the preoccupation on zombies and things like that. I think if you were reading too much into it, as I am want to do, and lots of us are want to do on this podcast, you could argue that it's the show grappling with its own mortality, realizing that it's racing towards the end, or hoping that it's racing towards the end of kind of its time on television, and so wanting to slow itself down and wanting to make that moment last, or perhaps the opposite experience of kind of like the moment of reaching towards the end, feeling like it takes forever. Like there's a sense when you read interviews that everybody who worked on the show was understandably exhausted at this point, having been making it for 7 years. So part of me wonders if that's maybe why you see time slowing down a lot over the course of the 7 seasons. Like, okay, we were almost there. We got to get there. We just got to work through it. But there is also a preoccupation in the 7th season, and it has always been there. It's always been part of the show. It's been woven into the fabric of the show, but it really comes up in a big way of the idea of like faith and God and belief and like devils and divine will at work in the world. I mean, it's obviously here. It comes up again, obviously, I don't know how many first-time listeners we have, but let's just say it comes up in a big mythology-driven 2-parter later in the season where you might not expect it to come up. It comes up in the cigarette-smoking man's return in NME, where he's presented as an angel. It comes up in Signs and Wonders, which is one of the show's most direct explorations of faith. And that, again, faith has always been part of the X-Files, going back to the 2nd season episodes like Fearful Symmetry, which is like Noah's Ark, but with, aliens, through to episodes like Revelations, for example, with Scully, through to episodes like All Souls. But it's never felt quite as concentrated or as kind of like loud in the mix as it does around this time, around the 7th season of the show. I mean, we did a special episode where we talked about the premiere as the last temptation of Mulder, effectively drawing on the Christian Gospels in terms of characterizing Mulder to the point of having him literally crucified on a specially designer-built operating table. So I think that's perhaps something that got carried over from Millennium as well, because Millennium is a lot, I think the religious subtext of Millennium is a lot louder in the mix during the 3 seasons it's on TV. Like, I mean, it opens with a serial killer quoting Nostradamus and the Second Coming, I feel like maybe that's another thing that got kind of carried over when Millennium got wrapped up and cancelled. It's like, okay, now this is just something that the X-Files does. Or do you think I may be reading too much into it? Do you think like...
No, I definitely think that. So I think without further ado, we should maybe dive deeper into it and talk about some specifics of the show. So we'll go and do that now. But just before we do that, remember that we do have The Last Temptation of Mulder, and it is available to Patreons. Ooh. So by all means, come and join the Patreonship. There's loads of interviews and things like Annabeth Gish has done an interview that we've got on there, all that kind of thing. So it's worth joining that community. So just while we're talking about that, but we shall look at this episode in more depth now. The opening scene. Now, there's a couple of things in this I just wanted to just briefly talk about, and we'll continue the conversation like we have been doing. But there's a couple of things. One, there's nothing supernatural about Donny Faster. He's just plain evil, and he's got the Millennium ba-boom kind of thing going to it. And there's the talking about Rob Bowman's direction. There's a moment where Donny Faster walks directly into the camera, which is an Alex Krycek kind of retread.
It's a Peyton Bowen shot. He's used it in, I think, does he use it in 731? Does he use it in Apocrypha or Piper Maru, one of that 2-parter as well? I mean, like, you could argue it even pops up, I think, in one of the Redux episodes. I don't know if that's Bowman. I think that's Goodman, but it does a similar sort of thing where Mulder barrels the camera. Which is interesting because, like, those are big mythology blockbuster episodes. That's like this shit is real is what that kind of says to an audience. So it's weird to see it in this creepy dude walks out of a prison.
After being slow motion and having hands cut off and all kinds, which we'll talk about. Yeah. But there's quite a lot here in, I think, X-Files going forward, and it's something that will come up in conversation right through this, I think. But for me, things like Scully's determination to work, that she retreads the whole case doesn't bother me, that we've got, the way that she has to work. She doesn't have a choice to work. You know, the X-File is finished now. We need to just go home.
Yeah.
But she has there's a lot of things within this that there's like a determination from her to continue on the work, even though, you know, this, as Mulder says, he did one on her pretty much on this. So there's that will come into it in later stages as well.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Orison as well shortly. But just in general with Scully's characterization here, it's really interesting for me.
It is. And I mean, like, again, it's notable. It's kind of funny that, like, the last time I was on, we were talking about, like, biogenesis. We talked about, like, the last temptation of Mulder. But, like, how so much of the sixth season is like, well, what would happen if you stopped the car and got out? What would happen if your quest was over? What does life look like on the other side of the fence? And I know that this isn't exactly that, because this is tied to a very specific traumatic experience. But I do find it interesting that, like, Orison is like, no, the work continues. The work is never over. And, like, you have Mulder telling Scully early on to go home and to, like, back off this case, which is very much, again, standard procedural kind of, like, cliche. It's like, you're too personal. This is too close to you. It's like, in this department, we go by the book, which is incredibly blunt. It's an incredibly blunt way of, like, explaining who Donnie Pfaster is to audience members who may not have been watching the show during the second season, when I think it was still airing on Friday nights. And was still it was a cult phenomenon. It was getting good reviews, but it was not the, like, blockbuster ratings juggernaut that it would become. So it's completely understandable that the show needs to reintroduce and re-explain who Donnie Pfaster is, even if that is largely in a scene where Mulder tells Scully stuff that she already knows about, like, her traumatic experiences. But, like, later on as well, you have the sequence with, like, with Orison, where Mulder's like, yeah, we're done here, job's over, and much earlier than usual. Looks like we got a whole 10 minutes to relax at the end of this episode. And, like, I kind of find it fascinating that that's almost a mirror image of that kind of, like, sixth season. Well, what do we do if we stop the car? You know, what do we do when we get out? What do we do when it's over? What's life like on the other side of the fence? That now it's like, no matter what, we cannot stop working, because if we go home, there will be a monster lurking in the closet and will want to kill us and probably call us girly girl. Can we actually talk? I want to ask you this, actually, because this is something I wonder about when I look at Orison, right? Just as an episode of television, why, and sorry, not like why in general, not like why is Orison ? But like, why Donnie Pfaster? Why bring back Donnie Pfaster, right? Because the show, like, so the show has its internal continuity. It has its internal recurring mythology. It has figures like the cigarette smoking man, the syndicate, and they're all seeded throughout as well. Generally speaking, its Monster of the Week episodes tend to be standalone. Now, there are exceptions. So there are, like, episodes like Squeeze and Tombs, where, like, Glenn Morgan and James Wong looked at Squeeze and they said, look, that was a traumatic experience for everybody involved. We had no idea what we were doing. We fought with the director on it. We would like to take another bite of the apple. We'd like to take another shot at that concept. So at the end of the first season, we're going to go back and we're going to do Tombs. And, like, it works remarkably well. And those two episodes are close enough together that it's like, yeah, I remember Squeeze. I really like Eugene Victor Toombs. Let's do this again. Then you have, like, the other big example is Pusher and Kitsunagiri, where you have, like, the third season and the fifth season, where they're only 2 years apart. And, like, I know a lot of people don't like Kitsunagiri, and I'm not going to pretend that Kitsunagiri is, like, a worthy successor to Pusher. But one of the more interesting aspects of watching Kitsunagiri is that it really feels like Vince Gilligan is openly, sarcastically mocking the idea of doing a sequel episode, where it's like sister of Pusher ! Like, it's such a delightfully kind of, like, self-aware and kind of hacky sequel, where it's like, play the hits, do them all over again, as if to say, like, look, we know the X-Files is becoming this cultural force, you know, so let's have a bit of fun at the expense. Like, if we're going to start recycling concepts, let's recycle a concept, and let's make the concept how absurd it is that we are recycling this concept 2 years later. Whereas with Pfaster and with Orison, I look at this and I wonder, like, I get that Irresistible is a landmark piece of the X-Files. It's one of the best episodes the show has ever produced. Pfaster is one of the most memorable characters ever produced, but I'm also like, why bring him back? Why do it now? And why not do, I don't know, like Fluke Man, I would suggest to be more iconic and would be more interesting to do something else with. Or, you know, the Peacocks were banned from television. Okay, so they're off the table. But there has to be somebody else who came back. Why do Pfaster, and why do Pfaster now? That's my question to you, Kurt.
Well, my answer would be, it can only be because of the actual subject matter of the episode. For me, I think if Orison's been partly written by Chip Johannesson, he comes with this paper that says churchgoer goes into prisons, takes somebody out of prison, and kills them in God's name, and touches upon a character that's evil. That's all I can think of. Is that one? It potentially could be a figures issue, bring more people back in, or return of Donny Faster, because I can't imagine anyone else in the X-Files history which would pull from an evil perspective that way. I think if you think evil and you think X-Files, you'd think this grotesque, as you say. There's not that many. You've got the people from Home, but you're not going to use them.
Yeah. They're not coming back on television, I think, according to the chairman of Fox. I'm never on television again.
The Peacocks aren't ever going to come back. But no, I think it's literally just that. It's as simple as that. I think it's as simple as the story was as the story is. And it was like, well, let's put Donny Faster into that position. And I think necessarily it is a mistake. I do think it's a mistake because you could have a new character quite easily. And, the fact that Orison's touching with pure evil, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a Donny Faster. It could be someone else. It could be, I'm going back to this Millennium thing again, but it could be characters like you've got with Mabius, that whole idea of Mabius, which is basically what it is. Of a man who is actually evil and a demon or a devil or whatever it may well be, and that Orison bites off more than he can chew, and it just goes to show you up in that higher power kind of struggle that there's this issue. But I do think it's as simple as they just wanted to bring in the figures.
That's fair. I mean, again, part of me is wondering, how rabid, I know that everybody loved Irresistible. How rabidly was the X-Files fan base waiting for, Faster to come back? Because again, there's not a tradition of it. There's not it's not like the show has this level of kind of bringing back Monster of the Week. It's it's going to be Faster's turn soon. Logically, they have to get around to Faster. Because a lot of the seventh season is, and again, it's that thing where everybody working on the seventh season thought that it was the end of the road. They thought they were done. So a lot of the seventh season is kind of back against the wall. What have we always wanted to do that we never got a chance to? So Gilligan gets to pitch, he does his Monster Point of View episode. He doesn't get to do his Unsolved Mysteries episode, but he does get to do his Cops episode. And it's great when you hear them talk about it, because it's really just Carter's fine, Vince, you can do your Cops episode. It's the last chance we're going to get. Gilligan gets to direct as well. They recognize that they have to wrap up the Samantha Mulder plotline, for example. There's a sense of all this stuff that they need to tidy up, but it also just a sense of kind of exhaust. I don't know. It's really odd to me that it's you're in the seventh season, you're on the home stretch, and you have a script that presumably worked reasonably well without Faster in it, because Johansson pitched it and sold it without Faster in it, or at least pitched the idea and they're that's interesting enough to go, but what if Donny Faster was in it? So you have to wonder. I just find it really odd that it's Faster was on the show's bucket list, so to speak. That's we just need one more shot at Donny. That's what we need.
Yeah, I do think it is a strange choice. I really do. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's elements in here when he does what he does well, and as you say, I think part of Rob Bowman's direction doesn't really pay off as much as it could do. And talking about sort of the re-emergence of him, as if it was going to be a shock during the actual episode itself, because I don't know what the press was like around this time for it. I don't know if it was a question mark on Donny Faster's coming back, but the way that they stay on Donny in the church, in the prison,
the chapel sequence,
yeah, and there's no music, there's no da dun da dun or anything like that at all.
It was Donny all
silent.
Along.
So they hold on it long enough to go, who is that? As a past casual fan, who is that? Was somebody from a couple of years ago.
I sure hope that there's an exposition sequence in the opening couple of minutes of this where Mulder explains who that was in great detail.
So, and he doesn't, I noticed that there's little moments I quite like. He doesn't lift his foot on the Glory Amen stuff, which I thought was quite nice. So as I say, we've talked a bit about Donny there. Let's talk a bit about Orison, because They've got a good actor, in Scott's Wilson, who would eventually come onto The Walking Dead. So talking about zombie connections. So he comes in there. It does, and for some reason I always thought he was in Signs and Wonders, but it's not. It's this episode. But the whole concept of him is, again, something that kind of comes into play in later X-Files, things like I Want to Believe, for example. Yeah. You've got this this faith kind of thing and
redemption, the redemption
stuff, which I thought was quite interesting. I mean, I don't know what you make to that, but what do you think to Orison as a character, bearing in mind he is the lead in this episode?
Yeah, well, he should, that's the thing, is that I think there's a really, really good kind of episode to be built around him, in that it kind of reminds me of something like, say, Trevor from the 6th season, which I think is one of the highlights in an unsung Monster of the Week episode. I think building an episode around Orison, around the paradox of Orison, around this man who, went to prison, believes that God spoke to him, and now is constantly trying to redeem people by smuggling them out of prison, only to be constantly disappointed to discover that this method doesn't work, and have his faith challenged in that way, is conceptually interesting and fascinating, and suggests something very similar to, you mentioned, you always thought he was in Signs and Wonders, because Signs and Wonders is the episode that I would argue does this well. Signs and Wonders is a remarkably uncomfortable episode of television, because it actually grapples with these things kind of head on. It actually wrestles with faith and what faith will drive you to do, and how difficult faith can be, and how sometimes true faith is, not based in anything rational or justifiable, or even something that makes sense, and how terrifying that can be when you don't have it or don't share it. And I think that there's a much better version of Orison that's like that, built around the character. The problem is that so much of Orison's character development, backstory, motivation, and character arc is effectively delivered to him in exposition by Mulder, because so much of the episode is dedicated to we gotta hit all the Donnie Pfaster beats. We're bringing Donnie Pfaster back. There's only been one Donnie Pfaster episode, but we know what a Donnie Pfaster episode looks like, so it has to hit all of the things. He has to creepily stare at a girl's nails. He has to promise to shampoo her. And we'll come back to it, because I think one of the interesting aspects of it is how it's a bad sequel to Irresistible, but not in a self-aware way. But yeah, it just, Orison is so squeezed out of his own episode that it really, the character feels like a bullet point summary. He feels like an index card rather than a character, which is, I think, a problem. And particularly when you have somebody like Wilson, who is great. I love Wilson. He also had a recurring role, I think, on CSI. Wasn't he Catherine's father, if I remember correctly? So I like Wilson a lot. As somebody who likes American TV at the turn of the millennium, I'm a big Wilson fan, and it's a shame that this is his shot at doing the X-Files. It's like when Andrew Robinson pops up in Alpha, and you're like, I love this actor. This actor should be getting a massive showcase. This should be a highlight of their career and their performance reel. And then the script is just I don't really know. And they just kind of get squeezed out. I am frustrated by how shortchanged Orison is in Orison.
Yeah. And I'm again, as you say, the tray panning aspect too. They don't actually straight away say tray panning, and I don't think they actually mention it at all in the episode. But Mulder says stuff along the lines of, it's a theory that mental capabilities are blah blah blah, that he's had his cut in his head, etc., to get more oxygen to the brain, which was in itself creates this perception filter that they're alluding to with the the cutting of the hands and the coffee being thrown over the guy. So you get, as you say, all of that kind of explained to you and not really necessarily spoken about. The one thing he does get to do, as I say, in relation to I Want to Believe as well, is that, you mentioned the scout thing. So the Sunday school teacher rather than the dad, and that she used to call Scully Scout in San Diego, that he writes, don't look any further on the piece of paper. And that's very much, as you say, very much like what Billy Connolly is in I Want to Believe. There's direct kind of mirrors of that. Yeah. And I find it fascinating that we're talking season 7 in 1999, 2000. It's not to, when was I Want to Believe? 2008?
Yeah, same summer as The Dark Knight, yeah.
So it's, I find it interesting that these sort of discussions, or these things are starting to peek through. The likes of, as I say, the words like "don't give up," in I Want to Believe, and and various different things that are kind of becoming staple X-Files as we get into its older years. And
and again, just kind of pushing, like, because one of the things is the mythology of the show, the literal, concrete, conspiratorial mythology based truth, as in who did what, when, to whom, for what purpose. That truth has largely been exposed in Two Fathers, One Son, for better or for worse, whatever you think of those episodes. So in the 7th season, truth becomes a more spiritual concept. You're not looking for the truth in the sense of, oh, I want to know the date of colonization. You're looking for the truth in this broader existential sense. So Don't Look Any Further, which I absolutely adore, is a cheesy makeout song that becomes this weird, profound meditation on faith and on the question of interrogating faith and the question whether or not you should look at these things or question these things, which I find, again, kind of fascinating and very, you're right that it kind of fits with the kind of very serious, very hefty themes of I Want to Believe. But I also like that we're at the stage where it's kind of this is a Chip Johannesson episode, so it's not just heavy and metaphorical and abstract. It's also weird. It's also gonzo. It's that it's an 80s makeout song. And as far as 80s makeout songs go, it's arguably not a particularly good one, because Don't Look Any Further is basically Settle for Me. It's it's I know I'm not great. I know we're not great together, but look, your option is you can settle for me, or you can continue looking. What are you going to do? I say just kind of give up and fight it. In terms of tray panning, which I find, this is just something I find fascinating. I did research for this episode when I reviewed it back in 2015, but tray panning apparently had obviously it was big in the 60s and 70s as kind of the new age kind of wave of kind of stuff and kind of pseudoscience, pseudomedicine. But apparently it experienced a surge of popularity the late 90s and towards the turn of the millennium. Apparently a few months after Orison aired in the States, the British Medical Journal had to denounce the practice in response to a wave of self-trepanation.
Right.
Yeah, a month after Orison aired, ABC aired footage of a tray panning procedure and were subsequently ordered to hand over the tapes for a criminal inquiry on the matter. At the start of the 21st century, tray panning was skirting so close to the edge of legitimacy that I believe the official X-Files website included a link to Trepanation advocacy group in the press releases kind of for this episode. So it's weird to kind of look at this, what is just what could be an entire episode of itself. This idea that this man has cut his skull open and gained the capacity to mind control others and control their manipulation of time and space, or perhaps even literally smuggle individuals out of confined spaces using it. But I love that it's weird that could be an entire X-Files of itself. That is enough to give you 45 minutes of television without the angle of, well, Reverend Orison is a former convict who heard the voice of God and who has decided to redeem convicts, and without, oh, by the way, Donnie Faster is also back. It's kind of surreal how much this episode tries to kind of cram in to its runtime. And I would almost admire it if its way of doing that wasn't just having Mulder talk about this stuff before it moves on to the next thing on its list it has to get through.
Do you feel, I mean, if I was to suggest to anyone, if they wanted to catch a Millennium episode of Chip Johannesson's, I would say watch Force Majeure.
Absolutely.
Because it's probably the closest to an X-File, and it's completely gonzo, and listen to our coverage on The Time Is Now, because that's gonzo as well. But do you think that within that, the Force Majeure, obviously still had Chris Carter running that show at that point, there definitely feels like there's been reins put on Chip at that point to sort of, well, no, you've got to re-explain this, because there is things that are getting away. There's the 606 time, the power cuts, there's the
light
actual
explodes not only slow motion at the climax of the episode, God, I presume, makes the light in Scully's apartment explode. It's not an episode that does half measures, which is kind of, I kind of admire about it, but I also kind of wish that it picked a lane or one thing, not even one thing, just one area of things. It's like, pick a corner of this room that you have decorated with ideas and concepts and just spend 45 minutes there. Don't like throw the stuff all over the floor and like jump around from one big idea to the next. They're all great ideas. They're all ideas that could sustain episodes, but it's like, I feel like you need to justify like slow motion as Scully shoots Donnie faster and her light explodes after the magical priest who has been smuggling people out of prison in the hopes of redeeming them but has failed to do so, possibly by having trepanned himself, giving him the ability to manipulate others' experience of time and space, despite being dead at the time that our experience of time and space is being manipulated as Scully shoots Donnie faster. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. It is. And as I say, to hear more of us talk about Mad Chip Johannesson episodes, going over to the time.
No, Force Majeure is a masterpiece. Like, Force Majeure is unequivocally a masterpiece. Like, I'm hesitant to say that, like, Carter had put reins on him back then, as opposed to just, like, Force Majeure feels like it was his concept and he ran with it. Like, my feeling with Orison is that, and I don't know, because, you know, nobody has talked to the cast and crew in that level of depth behind the scenes that I'm aware of. But my feeling watching the episode is that Johannesson got a whole bunch of notes on his script because the writing staff wanted to do something that was maybe parallel to or intersecting with what he wanted to do. And his response as a writer was to assume that he could do both things simultaneously, which I admire.
Absolutely.
Like it takes gumption to be like, okay, I got a bunch of notes. Those notes want to turn my script into something that it's not. That's okay. I'm a team player. My script can be all of these things simultaneously. But that's what it feels like to me. And I have no evidence to back that up. But like, I would argue that like Force Majeure and Maranatha, like in the first season of Millennium, like they feel more uncut Johannesson, if that makes sense. They feel like they're like unfiltered, unhedged, unqualified. And I feel like those perhaps work because they're not. And I think they arguably work better than, say, some of his third season episodes, like Skull and Bones, for example, or Bardo Thadal. And again, notable that like trepanning, that's a Johannesson thing. One of the big recurring themes in the third season Millennium, spoilers for anybody who hasn't watched the third season Millennium, is the idea that the Millennium Group is experimenting on people's brains and changing the way that they think. So trepanning is very much like in the wheelhouse of things Johannesson is interested in as a writer. But I think that like his early episodes like Force Majeure work better because they're not burdened with carrying something else on them. They can be entirely what they are, and they can just be really fun standalone adventures, as opposed to his later episodes, which have to be these are important episodes that determine the direction of this show, which is already dealing with a lot at this stage of it. Or what it is here, which is this is an episode that is also bringing back a character with a lot of continuity baggage from a time before most of the writing staff were working on the show. So I don't think that like Force Majeure was Johannesson reined in, but I do think that.
Oh no, I don't think. I was arguing that point. I think that he's been reined in this episode, and Force Majeure is probably
uncut. That's the pure stuff.
Yeah, I think. Also, that, and this is pure speculation, if we're talking about speculation right now, is that I feel that there might have been within this episode some issues, because what I did notice on this rewatch is there's a lot of ADR, there's a lot of additional dialogue recording, and to me that must mean that there must have been some issues behind the scenes, whether or not it was on filming days themselves or whatever, or maybe reshoots, or they,
I suspect, like, is it possible that the episode was just too long and you needed to like cut scenes and like have details explained in ADR? Like that would also explain a lot about this episode, where like we got into the editing bay and it's like it's like an hour and a half long. Isn't like, was it the first cut of The Field Where I Died?
The Field Where I Died.
Yeah, it's infamously long, and that's why there's so much ADR in it. So it would not surprise me. But yeah, also what you suggested, it's possible like they were rewriting on the day as well.
Yeah, it's possible. I still want to see that hour and a half version of Field Where I Died, because I'm one of the few that actually really like that episode.
Oh yeah.
So there's also there's moments in this which I've started to try and look for because I need to be a shipper, apparently.
Do you need to be a shipper?
I need to be a shipper. I'm not a shipper.
You drew the card. Okay. All right.
Okay.
So we're now going to the shipping forecast with Kurt North.
We're now going to the shipping forecast with Mr. North. There's the secret year of sex, apparently, season 7. And there is a couple of things in this episode where he's doing the Gloria Menace doesn't seem to work on you. And there's a couple of smiley moments. There was stuff that I did last episode in Rush. Millennium's just happened as well. Where do you stand on the secret year of sex?
I believe they probably have to have been boning. This is so crass, by the way. I love this. It's like, I'm completely agnostic. I'm completely above it all, but they've definitely been screwing each other since at least my bet I would put it at the start of the 5th season. I think there's just a change in the dynamic of the two of them. I think there's a change in the dynamic of the show. I think that there's a shift in tone of the show. And I think that like around the time of Detour is probably the point where if I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, there has to be some stuff between them that we are definitely not seeing. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that stuff is the kind of stuff that Mulder watches in his spare time on the Office VCR, or if that stuff is just, no, they help each other move on weekends. But there's definitely some stuff that we are not seeing at that point, I think.
It definitely feels like there's definitely more overtness in this season, I think. Overall, there's a lot more playful. Like in Rush, one of the debates was about their tie. Mulder and Scully outside after they investigate and interrogate the first suspect, Tony, I think his name was. And there's a moment where Scully and Mulder are talking. It's a point of view over Mulder's shoulder. And the way that like Gillian Anderson's looking down, it's like, is she playing with his tie there? Kind of like Tombs kind of thing. So that was the debate. We had a debate on that.
I love that it's like, I'm not a shipper, but by the way, I'm just like, I love how you're committed to this. It's like, I was told I have to do it, so I'm going to do it as thoroughly as possible.
I'm trying my best. I'm getting help from all kinds of the X-Cast community, so we're all good. All right. Okay, so what about if we move on from that? So let's move on from that. So we've got the things like the power cuts. We've got again, you've got moments that have to display Donny Faster when we get Donny Faster in his tighty whities and the girl.
I love a good proper unshaved man on 90s television. I have that's one of the things that really struck. I do another podcast, slight plug here for the 250, and one of the interesting things that podcast involves looking at the history of cinema, like from the 1920s through the present day, the evolving way that men's bodies are portrayed on screen, because women's bodies have always been like objectified and have always been kind of like leered at and kind of like just reduced in ways that are often quite creepy and uncomfortable. Men's bodies on screen are fascinating because they reflect a different set of insecurities or anxieties, where like I was watching this today and I was thinking, there is no way that you would let a man that hairy on television today. Like if you wanted him to be threatening and because like he is Nick Chinland. Nick Chinland is like, he's an angular actor. He does creepy very well. He had like a pretty solid run playing kind of like character roles in the late 90s and 2000s, to give him credit. But he is like, he's in his tidy whities. It's meant to be creepy, but like it's also... There's a little bit of, he's a bit of a hunk going on there. This is a guy who's been in prison, has been working out. You get a nice low angle, you get a shot of his legs, a shot of his body. And like, my big takeaway was, if this was on television today or in a movie today, there's no way that much body hair would be tolerated. Sorry, I realized it just lowered the tone of the conversation.
One of my friends' nickname is the Bear. So he wouldn't definitely be on TV.
Well, they'd shave him or they'd wax him or they'd take it out in post. They'd smooth it over in post. But my prime example is, say, the Blade Runner movies, right? So like the 2 Blade Runner movies are about like these worn down, beaten down, like private eyes. So it's like, it's Deckard played by Harrison Ford and it's Kay played by Ryan Gosling. And like, in Blade Runner, the original, Harrison Ford takes off his shirt and he's not in bad shape. He's a good looking man, but it's like, that body's had some wear on it. He hasn't been going to the gym every day. He's not drinking his protein shakes. He probably enjoys a good steak. That's a man's body, right? What it looks like at the time. And then you jump forward to like Blade Runner 2049 and like Kay's meant to be just as beaten down. just as like depressed, just as average man on the street. Like he's covered he's covered in bruises. Yeah. And then he takes off his shirt to take a shower and you're like, whoa. You're well, we know one area where that man is more than adequately equipped for the world in which he finds himself. But yeah, I feel like today, if you had that sequence with not to take this podcast down a very weird road, but if you had that sequence with Donny Faster today in his tidy whities, like he would look a lot more conventionally sexy, I suspect, even allowing for the content of that sequence.
Right, okay. Well, that was a tangent I wasn't expecting. I know, yeah. But whenever we talk about tighty whities, I mean, you know, I've said tighty whities a few times, so in Sarah's mind, it's just going to be going back to Skinner. That's where she lives. She lives in that world, so it's fine. There's
a question. Could you get away with Skinner on television today? Like, could you get away with that? Like, I feel like Skinner might get an exception because he's kind of bald and he has that kind of bare physical. Sorry, this is just for Sarah Blair. This entire section of the podcast is just for, but I feel like you could get away with like hairy Skinner on television today because he is manly and grr, and like that's the appeal of his like male body type. But yeah, I'm not sure. I do feel like I feel like you'd shave Chinland. That's my take. That's my hot take.
Okay, that's for Irresistible 3.
Yeah, I mean, well, like there are Bundy stands on Twitter apparently. Like apparently there's a whole like is Ted Bundy hot section of Twitter, which is I am confused. I am very old. I do not understand how things work, but that is a thing that exists.
Well, I suppose Ted Bundy was the whole point of his actual killing, though, wasn't it? It was like he was the everyday man, very affable,
charming, approachable,
kind of like charming,
yeah.
Which is a whole new podcast. We're talking about Ted Bundy. So I mean, the scene is, you know, it's replaying again Irresistible. The fact, but the only issue being that it's with red hair. She wears the wig.
The thing with the Faster stuff, which is really frustrating, is that it's a play the hits version of Donny Faster. Yeah. It's like we have a checklist of this character based on the things that he did in Irresistible, and we have to run down all of them. He has to call Scully girly girl at least once, you know? He has to like attack a sex worker. He has to be really creepy about her body washing. But the thing is that it's so absurd. Like in Irresistible, all that stuff is frightening because we haven't seen it before. It's the first time we've seen a character like that on the X-Files, certainly, but arguably on television at that point in time. And so like when he's fixating on like washing her hair and like handing her the lotion and using the lotion on her skin, that's really uncomfortable because we've never seen it before. We don't know how this character is supposed to work. But like there's a moment here where the prostitute kind of turns around and he's literally bundled up with kind of like hair care products. He has like 8 or 12 of them kind of pressed against him. Like he's like shopping. He's just been down the like hair care aisle and grabbed absolutely everything. And it feels like the show is going for like a creepy, like, look at how weird this guy is. We're doing the bit from Irresistible, but turning it up to 90. But in effect, it feels more like a parody or a cartoon. Like there's this really weird energy throughout where like Faster is this weird butt monkey for most of the episode, where like there's a moment where Orison like shows up at the diner and he's like, how do you think he got out of prison? And Faster responds, I don't care, I'm busy right now. And you have that like there's the moment where he tries to attack the sex worker, and like I get why this is, and we'll talk about maybe why this is in a moment. It's tied to, I think, why Bowman is not the best director for this and why that is completely understandable. But you have the moment where he tries to attack the sex worker. He discovers that her red hair is a wig. She manages to like escape him. She knocks him over and he bangs his head against the sink and he falls over. And then you have the sequence where Orison kind of ambushes him with a gun. And like the whole sequence there is really weird because it seems like it's a really pitch black comedy about the worst day of Donny Faster's life. Like it's something like from a James Gunn. No, it's not from a trauma, but it's like a really dark script where it's like this serial killer can't catch a break, can he? Kind of thing, which is it's a very odd energy for a sequel to an episode that was like, this thing that we don't recognize and don't know and completely alien and unknowable and ununderstandable is stalking the streets, and we don't even have the language to describe what it's doing or how it makes us feel as people. And instead to go to, well, no, that's just Donnie, am I right? Feels a little bit kind of odd and awkward and uncomfortable, and reduces him to a set of tropes and a set of kind of, recognizable beats that I don't think work, and I think diminish him and diminish the episode, if I'm being entirely fair and entirely honest.
Yeah, and you've led me straight into it, because obviously that the grave digging scene is you've got him in tears.
Yeah.
And it takes that ominous, real dark kind of what you'd expect in season 8, like sort of motion LA dark. It's kind of like almost like a horror in itself. And it's like, well, where's that come from? Now, we know we've discussed that. It's like that you've got the potential devil, evil. The whole point of him being evil and irresistible in my eyes is that he's a human being, and that, human beings can be that evil. But then to turn it into almost like a horror trope, typical kind of, the devil's going to win out here. It just doesn't feel right. And the whole, when he's being inaudible and he's crying and then he repeats what Orison says, and I cry because you cannot kill me, which we've discussed before. But it puts him in that Moebius mode, or just a general horror mode of like, it's the devil, you can't kill the devil. And it's like, is that meant to be scary? It's not Rob Bowman's wheelhouse, and it just doesn't fit for me.
Yeah, the thing is with Moebius is that Moebius is a ruthless and unstoppable killing machine throughout the 3rd season of Millennium. When Moebius tries to kill somebody, they generally end up dead, whether by his own hand or just while trying to evade him or escape him, as in Bardo the Doll. Whereas the problem with Orison, is that Donnie Faster has just spent 5 years in prison. He needed the help of a magic mind-controlling trepanned priest in order to break out of prison. He has, not been able, he's outwitted by he's defeated by a call girl and caught off guard by the priest again, dragged out to the middle of nowhere and presumably put into his own grave. And it's now he's unkillable. It's why now? Where was this unkillability or the living embodiment of all evil during the rest of the episode? And to be fair, to give the benefit of the doubt to Johannesson as a writer, and I think in particular to Bowman as a director, I understand why they don't have him brutally murder the prostitute, because that is a horrific cliche, and it's something that we talk about when we talk about crime fiction. Something we talked about when we talked about Millennium as well is the presentation of victims and the way in which a lot of this sort of serial killer stuff is presented in a way that is salacious and exploitative and invites the audience to salivate over the suffering of typically young women, and particularly young women from classes or groups that are deemed expendable, like sex workers, for example, and how that can feel uncomfortable, and it's an uncomfortable aspect of the whole serial killer genre, and arguably spreading out into true crime and the way that we talk about that as well. So I understand why Johannesson doesn't want to lean into that as a writer, and I also understand why Bowman as a director doesn't push his sensibility in that way. His camera doesn't feel voyeuristic. His camera doesn't peer. It doesn't leer. It doesn't kind of sweep in or kind of sneak around corners in the way that, say, David Nutter's camera does, for example. It doesn't use these heightened angles that are designed to evoke horror cinema, say, Kim Manners does, the opening of something say, Home, for example. Bowman's direction is very much I'm putting something in front of you and communicating it to you very clearly in the bluntest possible manner. We mentioned, the signature Bowman shot is the character walking right towards the camera, making the audience aware of the camera's position in the shot and the actor's relation to it. And so Bowman isn't interested in making us voyeurs to Donnie Faster brutally murdering beautiful young women. And Johannesson as well is probably not particularly interested in doing another pasty white guy serial killer story. But on the other hand, if you're going to bring back Donnie Faster as a character, if you've decided that's what you're going to do, that is what Donny Faster does as a character. So if you're not going to indulge those tropes, if you're not going to be salacious, if you're not going to be exploitative, if you are going to make a conscious choice to avoid treating female characters as disposable or as kind of bodies to be mutilated and killed in front of the camera and the audience, then why bring back Faster at all? Why try to tell this particular story? That's my big I can't figure out like connective problem with Orison, where it's like, I understand not wanting to do the stuff that Orison chooses not to do, because I understand why you would feel uncomfortable with that and that whole like the baggage that comes with those tropes and conventions. But on the other hand, if you're not going to do those, why center this episode around a character whose entire purpose and kind of function is to revel in those tropes? It's a very odd thing.
It is, and I think that the voyeuristic thing is definitely I think the main thing that I get, because obviously the graveyard scene is beautifully done. You know,
the lighting is striking,
nice, but it just doesn't involve you in that way, which, you know, is unfortunately. I've got a couple of things before we head into the final 10 minutes of the next episode. I mean, the final 10 minutes of this episode.
It does feel like the next episode, to be fair.
So just a couple of things. So first, I wanted to briefly talk about Mulder and Scully, because obviously this is the X-Files at the end of the day. There's a couple of times that obviously when religion's brought up, Mulder goes into his like brat mode, and he does it a little bit here. And we've got when he says about nutbags and Scully tries not to take offense, that Scully's trying to, it actually goes out on the limb and explains what she's seen and what she understands to, you know, is God talking to her kind of thing. So we've got all of that going on. But then later on, we get the Scully role reversal again of apologies, or maybe it wasn't this again, which is a bit tiresome in some ways. I found was a bit. And then obviously Mulder being bratty was obviously the other main thing. But he does say, as I say, we've alluded to it before, a few times he says, are you not listening to the message of like, don't look any further? He actually says, you know, well, maybe it's telling you something, and she's not willing to accept that. And I think it's kind of like, as I say, some of the other things that Scully's had in the past, like don't give up signs and stuff like that. But it's interesting, the Mulder and Scully dynamic between the two of them when it comes to the fact that, as you say, the trope of, you know, the people sending people home because that's the thing to do on procedural TV. But obviously Mulder and Scully have had this dynamic for a long time. And as I say, the role reversal towards the back end of the episode where she apologizes. So it has some mainstay X-Files kind of aspects to it, doesn't it?
It does. And I mean, like, one of the things about the seventh season is that, like, and again, this is an aborted arc that doesn't necessarily get developed as well as it could. But I think Carter's talked about how, like, when he wanted to map the seventh season, he wanted, ironically, to have a journey for Scully that is closer to the journey she actually has in the eighth season, where he wanted to have Scully journey towards being a believer. And like, so you have that tension back in the Sixth Extinction, where Scully like talks about how hard it is for her to do this without Mulder, where like she's out there like journeying, trying to understand this stuff, and it would be so much easier if Mulder were there because that's his role, and she's trying to step into that and trying to understand that. And I quite like that, you know, Orison and like the general shift in the seventh season towards, as we mentioned, kind of like stories that are based around religious faith in particular, like play into that, because that's always been like an interesting nuance or wrinkle in the kind of like traditional Mulder and Scully dynamic, is that Mulder, who believes anything, won't believe in God, and Scully, who is a skeptic about anything, does believe in God. So it's a nice way to play with that. But yeah, it is also interesting that the message is don't look any further, where like so much of the X-Files is about the idea that the truth is out there and that like we're looking for something and we want to understand something. And like there's like our heroes are questing towards awareness of something. And again, as we mentioned, one of the interesting aspects of the seventh season is because all the mythology stuff has been wrapped up, that something is always is at this point of the show more abstract and more theoretical than it is like literal or concrete. But it's interesting that like the message of this episode is no, stop looking. The truth is not out there. Yeah. You will never understand the truth. In fact, the truth will only bring you sadness and despair. You should just like stop looking for the truth. The truth is not out here. Go home. Job's over. And that kind of push and pull, and the way in which, and again, we'll probably talk about when we get to the final scene, but like the way in which the show kind of tries to have its cake and eat it in that regard, in that it's like, it's probably best not to think too much about what just happened, and what that means. And what that means, like, not just in a why did the light explode sense, but in a who we think of who these characters are and their relationship to one another and how that would be affected by what happens at the end of this episode. So it's kind of, again, interesting that, like, the show is like, nope, nothing to see here. Stop asking questions. Done.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, she's looking too hard for things that aren't there is one of the things that she says. And, you know, as I say, there's similar connotations throughout. So let's talk about that final scene. I remember, I think we did a rewatch. I think it must have been during it was the pandemic rewatch that we did. And it was basically every single day there'll be something posted out about the episode that we're talking about today. So it would be, you know, right from season 1 until, you know, whenever the pandemic would stop. So we got through the entire show.
So if you looped around and we start again, we're doing the Lone Gunman. We're on the Lone Gunman at this stage.
Exactly. We're doing minute by minute podcast now. So I remember, I think it was this point in time where we actually asked about that very question, and it's probably worth asking that question before we get into the actual contents of the scene. But we were talking about, is it murder? And there was a big debate about this and how we perceive it. And also even asking in the story, it says it, you know, that was it lawful? Is it not lawful? Is it God's work? Does God doesn't abide by law, but law has a certain aspect to it that Mulder covers up.
Yeah.
It's such a hotly debated moment. And I really intrigued to get your kind of perspective on it because it hasn't got an answer and it's not meant to have an answer. And I absolutely really love that part of the episode because, you know, he was under control. Mulder had him under control, and Scully murdered him. You know, so it's how you portray that and how you envisage that and what Mulder says afterwards. So what do you take away from that final moment?
Yeah, I mean, again, part of this is the incongruity of kind of getting there. Because, I mean, like, anybody who is familiar with, like, pop culture at the moment knows that there's the big Batman-Joker debate, which is the idea that, like, Batman defeats the Joker, refuses to kill him based on moral principle, puts him in prison, and the Joker keeps breaking out of prison and killing people. And, like, even here in this episode, you have, like, Mulder does one of the justifications is that, you know, like, look, Donny Faster would have surely killed again if given the chance. And it's like, yeah, but he only really broke out of prison because of a magic man who's, like, trepanned himself and had the ability to slow down time and decided to rescue murderers from prison and let them go and then kill them.
Yeah, he's not pushing.
Yeah, this is like a once in a lifetime exception. This isn't like Donny Faster's. This is his 5th go round in the circuit. He's going to be back on the street by morning. I feel like if they had put him in prison after this, they would have thrown away the key. And, like, that feels a little bit flippant, but I think, you know, the episode doesn't lean too much into that because it feels like that's Mulder trying to justify to himself more than, like, trying to justify to Scully. I like the ambiguity of it, and I like that there's no clear answer, and I like that it reminds me a lot of kind of, like, again, this notion of faith that runs through the 7th season, and in particular, like, uncomfortable aspects of faith, and particularly the idea that, you know, God, or what we describe as God, or whatever is out there, may not necessarily conform to our expectations or our understandings or our desire of what we would want it to be. And so, like, in Signs and Wonders, and again, I don't know if we have first time watchers kind of listening along, but, like, in Signs and Wonders, you have that kind of, like, idea of the new church, the new hip cool church, and the old, like, vicious, bitter, really aggressive, really angry, built around, like, suffering and snake bites and kind of inflicting harm on themselves, flagelating church. And the big twist at the end is that, like, the devil is in the kind of new hip cool church, the New Testament church, and implicitly then God is in the Old Testament snake wrangling, really uncomfortable, really kind of conservative, really kind of like, Old Testament approach to religion. And I like the implication at the end of Orison that, maybe God did decide to treat Scully as an instrument to kill Donnie faster. Maybe God was moving through her, as uncomfortable as that is for anybody who wants to believe in God to fathom. The idea that, God decided that Donnie needed to be killed and Scully was going to be his instrument to do so. I do also kind of, and again, I feel like the episode over-eggs the pudding with things like the exploding light and the slow motion. But I also like the idea that there's implicitly an ambiguity there where Scully has been like horrifically traumatized by this man twice. And both times escaping by the skin of her teeth, by luck as much as anything else. And this maybe being a post-traumatic response to that, understandably and justifiably so, and it possibly being a kind of a fugue state where she doesn't even realize she's doing it. And I think I like that the episode leaves that possibility open as well. That sort of thing. I like that there is no clear resolution. There is no clear yes or no answer to it. And I think that discomfort is good. I do think there is a slight problem in the fact that this literally never comes up again. And I feel like Scully, your partner, your soulmate, whether you are a shipper or not, your companion through this journey has murdered somebody, should change the dynamic of your relationship with her, no matter what you believe. I feel like there should be some pushback or some haggling or some reference to this or some indication that this means something to both of them, because we know that Scully is an intensely moral person. And we know that Mulder would happily die to protect the people that he cares about. But we also know that Mulder is somebody who is intrinsically curious and who cannot let go of a mystery. So it really feels rather odd that Scully killed Donnie Faster. Well, let's never speak of this again, or make any reference to it, or suggest that it will color the dynamic between the two of us at any point forward. I mean, the next episode is the amazing Marlene, where Scully's kind of wearing a sexy magician's hat and kind of smiling. And again, I look forward to the shipping forecast on that episode.
I'm on that one, so yes, there will be a shipping forecast. You'll be all right.
That's my kind of thing with it. Is that I think it's a bold swing. I think it's a good swing in theory. I like that it's ambiguous. I like that it leaves it out there. I like that it's deliberately uncomfortable. But I also feel like you can't do that and then go back to magical con artists and we're having fun next week as if nothing happened. That's kind of my big issue with it, I think.
Yeah, it's okay because eventually Mulder gets to be really efficient with the scalpel. So these things swings around about. I'm the same. I can't say that I don't like ambiguity, that I like ambiguity and then not like this end team, because I think it's really, really interesting. And it's right in my wheelhouse to leave an episode like it leaves it. But I do agree that there isn't any fallout after the fact. And, it's not that kind of TV show at the time of it being made that they would do that, even though X-Files did have some continuity, but it still wasn't in the throes of where we are now. But I always find it interesting as well, the way that she actually does say, she said something along the lines I'm more scared if it wasn't.
God,
and you've got that aspect as well.
What if it was me? Yeah. What if it was inside me? Yeah.
Yeah. But going back to the episode, the scene as a whole, you kind of alluded to it there. It is really visceral, this attack. This is completely different to the way Irresistible dealt with it. This is
heightened,
full on, throwing against the mirror, kicking out, throwing stuff. And it's quite relentless in a way. And it's, and in some ways I like it. It's not a retread, and I do like when he does have her on the floor. And as you say, some of the things that he does say, but it's more the fact that Scully still is communicative rather than the way she would have been back in Irresistible. She's basically saying, we should have, I was the one that asked you for life and stuff like that. And I love the way that that's portrayed so we can get some backstory on what Scully did afterwards, because we don't always get that. But at the same time, as you say, I'm going to run you a bath, and she screams. It's like, oh god, that's a horror trope. I don't like that.
I mean, again, like, there's a sense of like the episode stuck between a rock and a hard place, where like I think Spotnitz, who like joined in the late second season, has said like there was that run of episodes towards the end of the second season, including like Our Town and Irresistible, where Scully was just constantly in peril. And as writers, they said, we looked at that run of episodes and we said, yeah, we didn't do the character justice. Let's not try and do that again. And the problem is, if you're bringing back Donnie Faster, you really have no option but to do a variation on that again, because you need to play the hits, so to speak. You need to have the girly girl moment. And it's a very small thing, but I absolutely love the sequence where the federal marshals, I think it's the federal marshal who rings up like Mulder on his answering machine, and he's like, just talked to a goal girl who ID'd Donnie Faster as an attacker. Claims Faster got real upset when she was wearing a red wig. Upset she wasn't a redhead. This mean anything to you? This is the federal marshal who is working on the manhunt, who has presumably got Donnie Faster's file and knows that Donnie Faster's like last attempted murder was of a red-haired FBI agent. If he is fixating on women with red hair, like, I get that like Mulder misses the answering machine message and it's so contrived, but I also like, I really feel like that federal marshal needs to have a sit-down conversation with his boss where he's like, so you were working the case with the agent who he captured all those 5 years ago, and you noticed she was a redhead, and you noticed that he's a death fetishist, fixates, yeah, and you noticed that he was targeting women with red hair, very fixated on their red hair, and you didn't think that there was possibly some sort of connection you could make there.
I mean, she only at the very top of the hour said he is pure evil, and was obviously disturbed.
Yeah.
By the very nature that he's out as well, which I thought was interesting. And unfortunately, the song comes on Mulder's clock as well. It says, don't look any further. I'm like, no, he needs to look a bit further. And I quite like that, actually, because it gives you like kind of that Mulder, just listen, go to that voicemail. Don't look any further. It's like, oh, he's not going to look any further. Oh, come on.
Yeah. No, well, that
so
tension stuff is quite good. And again, that tension stuff I think works better because it's not tension based on, like, as we mentioned, the serial killer voyeurism tropes of like the cameras leering. It's based on, will Mulder notice something in the shot in time, which is the kind of thing that I think Bowman does relatively well. I think, like, again, going back to, like, Bowman is very good at tension and suspense. Like, that's not, like, literally Nicey and 731 are a runaway train of like suspense. So like he can do that. And like I think this stuff plays to his strength much more than a beautiful woman in peril in a bathtub, which feels like it would play more to something like Nutter or Manners as directors than it would to Bowman, I think.
Okay then. Is there anything else you want to say before we jump into the mailbag?
Not really. I do feel like, you know, God did Orison rather dirty in this episode, where he's like, you know what? I'm going to let you like control time and smuggle people out of prison and, you know, hope that they're redeemed and then kill them when they're not. Except this one guy you don't get to kill. He gets to kill you. Don't ask me why. I don't know why this guy, but that's the way it works. So I do feel like, I feel a bit sorry for Orison, as weird as that is to say about a man who helps serial killers break out of prison, despite the fact that it continuously goes terribly wrong for him. It's weird to end up in a situation where you're like, oh, that poor, like repeated prison breakout expert, and murder accomplice, I guess. But it's like, yeah, I feel like Orison had a really unfortunate, series of events.
What should have happened? You know, I'm not necessarily Orison, but the story actually, you could imagine it being pitched as a TV show, couldn't you? Around this time, you know, that an ex churchgoer does some trepanning and is now going around finding serial killers, finding killers, kind of Dexter style, and giving them the comeuppance through God. I can imagine a TV show being made.
Well, I mean, like, arguably, it would have been kind of the rip-offs of the X-Files that kind of emerged. Things like, if you remember American Gothic, I think with Gary Cole, like, it would have had that.
Caleb, wasn't it, with American Gothic?
Yeah, it would have had that kind of atmosphere to it as well. I think G versus E was around, like, the turn of the millennium as well, if I remember correctly. I think it was what Ronald D. Moore worked on after he left Star Trek Deep Space Nine, so it's probably right about now. But that sort of stuff. So I could see something like that working with Orison. But again, like, I really do think that, you know, if you're going to tell this story, then use a random other character instead of Faster. And that way, then you don't have to, like, suddenly shift gears in the final act and change what this episode is about and, like, write out the guest character who you've dedicated a considerable amount of time and attention to, you know, to this point, and then just have him kind of like killed off screen when the person that he's trying to kill turns into a demon, but is also, you know, somebody who was in prison for 5 years and is going to be like shot dead at the end of the episode. So I don't know how this works. It's very strange.
Yeah, Orison, the head of the actual title of the episode. Orison.
Yes.
Anyway, let's dive into the mailbag. So we'll go and do that now. Okay, so Tony's the first one to comment today. He said, a bit out of place and misjudged. Chip Johannesson popping over from Millennium to bring his season 3 aesthetic of that show to the X-Files, and in doing so wastes what is probably an unwise return for Nick Chinlund's Donny Faster. How do you top Irresistible? Credit a guest for trying to utilise him in a different way and subvert expectations, and this does allow for some spooky moments, such as the recurring use of the song, and a climax which is almost intentionally invokes Irresistible while giving Scully a troubling brush with some kind of higher power. Ultimately, though, however you slice it, Orison was made on the wrong 10-13 show and probably a few seasons too late to boot. So that goes to my question as again then, which I mentioned earlier in the top of the hour. Do you think this would have made a better Millennium episode?
Absolutely. And like, I mean, any season of Millennium, like, I think you would get slight variations of it depending on which season you put it in. Like, I think that, like, you could put it in the first season and it would just be more focused on the serial killer than the priest. You'd put it in the second season and it would be this really ambiguous thing about whether or not the priest was right and whether or not the priest was being guided by God. And you could put it in the third season and it would just be more about the tray panning and the slowing down of time. Like, I feel like if you put it in any of the 3 seasons of Millennium, you would end up with a slightly different episode. And it's really weird that it kind of comes out the other end. And again, as we kind of alluded to, the fact that it arrives at the end of the serial killer boom. So it feels very passe. It's like Irresistible was, not exciting, but it was interesting when it arrived because like the 90s serial killer boom was just kind of starting in pop culture. But like by like 1999, 2000, we're all kind of spent. Superheroes are, sorry, it's not superheroes. Serial killers are kind of like worn out at this point. They're kind of like, they're so last decade really. And it just feels tired.
Yeah. Time for the superheroes. Yeah. So, so we've got Rush. So it is on the crossover. Sherry Spahn says, I love all the angst in this episode, and this episode is full of it. Also love worried Mulder for Scully. Lots of good fanfic built off this ep. Solid Mulder and Scully interaction. In brackets, can you tell I'm a shipper? LOL. Yes, we can. And I'm still not reading any fanfiction. I will watch episodes again in a new light, but I will not read any fanfiction.
Smash Cut 2, season 9 of the X-Cast. And we moved on from the shipping forecast onto Can We Fic It?
Can we fic it? Brilliant. So there's obviously plenty of fan fiction around this one, apparently. So that's interesting itself. Adam Silva, like Kitsunagari, Orison started out as an unrelated idea, but then an old villain is thrown in. The episode isn't bad, but also like Kitsunagari, it weakens the returning villain, and that's a shame. I'll say that again. It weakens the return villain, and that's a shame. I still can't get it right. Irresistible is one of my favourite episodes, and I'd rather Donny Faster be a human, if barely, killer than the more supernatural one presented here. So they would have read the reviews on Irresistible. They would have known, this debate surely and it is interesting that they've gone full pelt into that he is a demon, isn't it?
And again, like you mentioned, like, you know, it being kind of ahead of the curve, Rush being slightly ahead of the curve, and like predicting I think we joked at the start, you know, predicting the CW verse to a certain extent, but at least predicting the superhero boom. And I kind of like, it does feel like this is like Orison is like predicting the point at which, you know, serial killers are no longer scary. You know what's scary? Demons are scary. So it's like, it almost feels like they have no choice but to do demons kind of thing. It's like, and again, it's sequel escalation. And, you know, not to disagree too strongly with Adam Silva there. I think he's entirely reasonable and entirely correct. I do think that like Kitsunagiri is a much weaker episode than Pusher, but I do think that like, I think Kitsunagiri is at least somewhat self-aware in what it's doing. I think like it's hard to watch Kitsunagiri and like not get a sense that the writers know that like doing a sequel to Pusher is a mistake, but we're somehow doing it for some reason anyway. Whereas when you watch Orison, it feels a lot more earnest. It feels a lot more like, well, yeah, we're doing a sequel to Irresistible, and it's probably a bad idea, but we might as well just try and do it the best we can. So yeah, what do we need to do? What's the checklist? We need 3 Donny Faster things. Can we get them? We got 3 Donny Fast. Okay, we're gonna drop them in. All right, deadly. You know, it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating in the way that sequels tend to be, but not in a way that seems self-aware or playful, just in the way that they are.
Okay, so Renee Lavrieri, if hopefully I've said that right, Renee. It was unnecessary. The only good part about this episode is Scully got to save herself this time, and I also like Mulder's intuition. It makes an appearance as well. So it's thank you very much, Renee. Mr. Knowles has been on, Darren. Christopher Knowles has been on. He said he loves it. Way better than the overrated Irresistible, and much better use of the character. One of Bowman's all-time best efforts, in my opinion. Mostly Chris and Frank, and I believe David Amann and Stephen Maeda has very little to do with Johansson's original script. Scott Wilson is perfect, and I love the recurring synchronicity with the tune. That's interesting that he says, I mean, obviously, you know, we absolutely value what Chris says. So it's interesting he's mentioned about Chris Frank, David Amann, and Stephen Maeda being involved.
It's worth knowing, like, Knowles kind of knows his stuff. Like, Chris knows his stuff.
Yeah,
he literally wrote the book on this, so I would take his word for that. And like, again, like, as we were going through it, we pointed out the Carter tropes. Like, the Avon saleswoman's kind of story is very similar to the Sunday school teacher. I do not doubt that at all. I do not doubt that.
And it alludes to that, as I say, with the ADR stuff that maybe, you know, there may be stuff that's happened in the past and, you know, that has that illusion. So, yeah, I would not, by any stretch of the imagination, you know, obviously Chris knows his thing. So, but he absolutely loves it. So there is love out there. And I know Marlene's on in shortly as well. She really likes it as well. And also, so we've got Ana Brigida Gomez. I like most of it. I feel the original bad guy freeing faster from jail was a weak plot device, but otherwise pretty solid sequel to the excellent Irresistible. Andrew Levitt says, the last act is an excellent tense climax between Donnie and Scully, but the rest of the episode is a waste of good character, turning the personification of evil into something supernatural. The character of Orison has potential. However, the episode spends most of its time rehashing who Donnie is. Ultimately, the episode is a disappointing mess. It's pretty much what we've been saying, isn't it? The you know, having to go over who Donnie is really kind of hampers the episode. So I would agree with that. Natalie say, I love at the end when Mulder says, and my report will reflect that. It's a great underrated shipper moment, showing that he'll always have her back no matter what. That's an interesting one as well, because Mulder's all about the truth.
Well, I mean, I think we kind of alluded to this. One of the more interesting aspects of kind of Mulder's character is the sense that when the chips are down, he is not necessarily as committed as he is in the abstract. I mean, like we mentioned when I talked about like Two Fathers, One Son with Carl, one of the more interesting aspects of One Son is that when the chips are down, when Mulder is presented with a chance to like get out and to save himself and save Scully and to like become part of the conspiracy, he takes it. His immediate response is to go to Scully and to try and get her there to save her. Like he doesn't when you know, and then obviously you have like the truth as well, where when Mulder is like presented with like the overwhelming evidence of what is going to happen when colonization begins, like he is overwhelmed by it. His immediate response is like not to fight it. It's not to share that information with the world. It's just to kind of shut down and accept it and to kind of go into himself. So I do think that's an interesting part of Mulder's character, is that like you have on the outside this very brashful posturing of, you know, I believe in the truth. People need to know the truth. The truth is important. But you also have this idea that, when when his back is against the wall, when the pressure is bearing down on him, he will protect the things that are important to him. And again, that irony, you could argue that he is Bill Mulder's son in that way, and that like Bill Mulder, like that whole big monologue Bill Mulder has in Anasazi, where he's like, you know, once you cash in, once you throw your lot in with them, you're in, basically. So the idea that Bill Mulder did all this nominally to protect his family, and like Mulder, for all that he rails against Bill Mulder, for all that he insists that he is not his father, you also have the idea that, when somebody important to him is placed in danger, or when they're faced with annihilation or kind of the alternative, you know, genocide or death or anything that goes with it, Mulder will break his own principles to protect them. I think that's an interesting and underrated aspect of the character. I think it adds a lot of nuance to him. So I entirely accept that moment at the end where Mulder is willing to cover for Scully. I don't think that's a violation of his character at all. I think that's entirely
no. It's a nuance, isn't it? As I say, it's like he's so after the truth, you know. And there's been discussions, you know, F. emasculata is a perfect example of like Scully saying, we don't want the truth to get out there because it will cause mass panic, and Mulder's going, no, the truth is there. But if you can imagine, it was getting to that point. You know, that you've got to take a nuanced approach, and you know, early seasons he was, as you say, an abstract thought on the truth. It's like his real prowess in like sort of, it has to be, no one has jurisdiction over the truth, but you know, that's not how life works. So I do think it's interesting that an interesting point with the fact that he says that my report will reflect that. In case you were wondering, because he said something like that, doesn't he? In case you were wondering, it's like, we know Mulder's got Scully's back.
I mean, it would be a bit of a twist if like Scully walks into like Skinner's office and there are officers there waiting to arrest her, and Mulder's like, the truth is in here, as he points to his report. Sorry,
she shot a man in cold blood. I was there. I had him. Everything. She just walked up and shot him in the stomach.
And then the light exploded for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, you've got a real thing about this light.
It's a big thing.
Yeah, it's a chandelier. It's some sort of and it's like the way that they do that. The shot, you can see the gun, and it's like it kind of happens the same time she shoots, and then there's another gunshot afterwards as well, which I thought was quite bizarre. But it's and then Mulder looking round at it as well. I was like, what's going on here?
I really hope this is happening in slow motion so I can properly appreciate it.
Okay, so we've got two more comments, and it is hotter than hell now. I'm just going to do my temperature check. The temperature forecast is now 31 degrees. So yes, so it's time to wrap up. Heather Ben says that disappointing and unnecessary. Yeah, there's a guy named Orison in it, but all we know, yeah, correct. But we all know it's really about Return of Donny Faster. Turning him into an actual demon was lazy. However, the scene where he and Scully fight is more intense than the last time around. And I'm totally there for her saving herself and shooting him without hesitation. I don't skip this one. And then finally, Marlene says, I think most of Orison, with the exception of the plodding exposition and explanation near the beginning, is a much better episode than Irresistible, with deeper character exploration and more complex and intractable questions. Particularly Scully's killing of Donny Faster than do serial killers fixate on their mothers. It doesn't wrap us nicely with a tidy bow of a genuine emotional hug at the end, but the unsettled feeling that remains is more thought-provoking. I agree with a lot of what Marlene says there, especially with the things I could say, the thought-provoking, you've kind of alluded to it here. We're in a different world at this point. It's not about serial killers. That's kind of a a gone generation as such. And they're not talking about the mothers and things like that, about
we're not still doing Psycho.
Profile.
We're not still doing
the profile
Psycho
of it. So it is interesting. There's a lot of there. And as I say, the fact that we do have this unsettled feeling, thought-provoking thing at the end. So I do agree with her on that motion. As I say, I would still go for 6.5 to 7. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's one of my favorite episodes, but
I feel like the Grinch. I feel like the Grinch here on this.
There'll be people that we at the same sort of score. I'll be interested to see what happens when this airs. But I would say that out of season 7, I said at the top of the season that I'm not quite sure how season 7 is going to fall for me. It's not a season I watched that much. You mentioned Ex-Cops. I watched that a lot. All things I would throw in if I felt like it. I would not necessarily watch it all the time. Closure and Sein und Zeit I love. Requiem's a great episode. Ex-Cops is fantastic. But the episodes around it, things like Rush that I've just watched, or and Chimera and things like that, I wouldn't necessarily watch too much. Even like Jesuit is a great episode, but I don't watch it that much. This episode I do watch more often than not, so I am quite surprised that I do watch it. It's a good rewatchability for me, but I still don't think it's a great over the top above 7 episode.
That's interesting, because like the episodes that I would rewatch from this would probably be like what I consider to be the good standalones. Like I know Thief is an interesting episode with a lot of baggage attached to it, but I think it's quite effective as kind of a standalone monster of the week. Chimera is a solid monster of the week, and it's interesting because it feels like it's one of the last of the proper monster of the week episodes. I know that Brand X is technically later, but that comes with its own kind of set of problems. But yeah, no, when I think of the 7th season, the ones I tend to rewatch are the oddballs. So things like Hollywood AD, Jesuit, Requiem, Ex-Cops, those kind of episodes. Or even like if you go back and you go to like, Hungry, or like, I mean, yeah, I think Rush is for me probably the standout monster of the week episode. And even that isn't like, I don't love that. I just like it more than you do. Which is, but like, it's a weird tone. The year has a very, very weird tone because it feels like they think they should be wrapping up, but they're not entirely sure yet. They're waiting for the hammer to fall. They're waiting to be kind of like told that, yeah, no, it's done. You're transitioning to feature films, or, they're waiting to hear that Duchovny is definitely not coming back next year when the lawsuit kind of wherever the chips fall on that. And so nobody is pulling any sort of trigger on it. So it's stuck in this kind of weird limbo state, which again perhaps ties into, as you notice, the abundance of slow motion footage, where it seems like lots of things are happening, but nothing is actually, there's no consequence yet, there's no outcome yet. Things are in motion, but they're not actually getting anywhere, which is an interesting aspect of the 7th season. I mean, I think the best episodes of the season have a kind of a devil may care, this is possibly the last time we're going to get to do this, so we might as well have some fun kind of approach to it. And the weakest episodes for me are the ones that feel like, oh, man, I got to get another X-Files in this. We got to get another script done this week. So Donnie Faster, throw him in. We got that script with the Reverend and the prison and stuff. People like Donnie Faster. Put Donnie Faster in that script. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure. That's what we're doing this week. That's my kind of like push and pull relationship with the 7th season in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me for season 7, it's I've got to remember where I was at the time as well. So I was 19, 20-year-old. So I was kind of like just starting a new job. I was, there was a lot of things happening in personal life. So I didn't watch, it wasn't necessarily like on air at the very time it started. I might have watched it by the end of the weekend rather than actually watching it on the Friday night or Saturday night, whenever it was. And also in hindsight, looking back, it's bookended by season 8, which I absolutely adore, and season 6, which is a really interesting season. So I think that that push and pull for me, that the season 8 I absolutely loved to bits. I loved the character of John Doggett. 7 feels a bit tired. 6 was refreshing. So it's I think it falls in there as well as the personal stuff when I was 19, 20-year-old. So, but yeah, that brings us to the end of the episode, Darren. So I no doubt you'll be on at some point in the future. and the X-Cast, and I'm not quite sure when that will be, but if people want to hear more of you or want to read anything or anything like that at all, where can people find you online if they don't already know? Because they should know by now.
Well, I'd say they don't need to look any further. But no, I mean, I'm everywhere that I've always said I am. So I have my own little blog called The Movie Blog with a 0 instead of an O in the word movie because I didn't register quick enough. I host my own podcast called The 250. You've been a guest on. I'm hoping to have you on again soon. We're trying to arrange with another guest. Hopefully have you on for Chris Nolan's Memento at some point in the near future is kind of what I'm hoping.
Excellent.
But we cover basically the 250, the IMDb's list of the 250 greatest movies ever made, and sometimes the bottom 100 as well. And then I do some stuff at The Escapist, at Escapist Magazine, www.escapistmagazine.com, where I write articles about pop culture. I write at least 2 a week. I also host a film podcast every second Monday. I host a Marvelous Escape every week that a new Marvel TV show is released on Disney+. And I just generally do some other stuff, including film reviews. So if you want to pop over there and check that out, that's well worth a go. I recently did a review of Space Jam: A New Legacy, which I am far prouder of than I probably should be. Some fantastic work by editor Matt J. Loughlin there. So if you aren't going to check out Space Jam: A New Legacy, the movie, check out Space Jam: A New Legacy, my review of it on YouTube. Give that a watch.
Fantastic. Well, you can find me in all the usual places. So on Twitter at @rmuldrake. It's RMULDRAKE. Main highlights for me, I've recently been on the Loki episode 4 with Tony, and Loki's just wrapped up at time of recording as well. So we await What If is the next show, and you can find the Marvel podcast that we're all on podcast 616. So just search for that and you'll be able to find us there. You can find me on the Red Dwarf podcast, Shipwrecks and Comatose, and that's found on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod. We've mentioned The Time Is Now a few times. We've done all 3 seasons. We're coming up to the 25th anniversary of Millennium. Ooh. So we are going to be doing some specials. You can find that on Twitter at The Time Is Now Pod. And then you can also find me on the Star Trek Picard podcast, Make It So. And you can find that at Jean-Luc Podard. And also various other places around the network as well. So there is other things happening on the network. You will hear some clips at the end of this. But Darren, thank you very much for coming on again. We'll see you again in the future.
No worries.
And until next time, remember, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast.
We are doing something even crazier than usual. We are doing 7 episodes in 7 days. Which lunatics are joining me in this journey? First up, hello Carl.
Hello, how are you doing there everyone?
And also, hello Colin.
Alright.
So what we've decided we're going to do is rather than do one episode covering the Smegazines, we're going to do the first 7 issues, one by one, episode by episode, day by day, for an entire week. It will either be brilliant or
I like how we're phrasing it as, we've gone crazy. Do you know what we're going to do? We're going to do some reading.
The Movie Palace.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's talk Now Voyager, because there's quite a lot to talk about with this film, actually. I just wanted to ask you both, first of all, sort of any interest in personal history with the film. Like Clara, I know a lot of these films that we've talked about in the past are films that you've seen as a child and, as a younger person. Is it the case with this one too?
Yes, definitely. I saw this as a kid. I don't think I quite understood it when I first saw it. I thought it was a romantic film. I don't think I really picked up on the mental illness and the sort of abuse.
We buy records.
Tim, it was record store day.
I was going to say there's an elephant in the room. I don't think we have mentioned it yet in this episode, have we? I wonder if some people thought that we were going to be ice cool and not even mention Record Store Day. Well, we are. We're doing it now.
Yeah.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The X-Cast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black. and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast Pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.